Hi everyone, my name is Ruben Hart, and I am here for my first ever live episode of my podcast, which is PRA, short for Politics, Religion, and Art Podcast. And I have a special guest co-speaker today. He is a doctor, a professor actually, at the California State University in Northridge. He is a professor philosophy. His name is Dr. Robert A. Greißis. He received his BA back in 1998 in the University of Dayton and his MA slash doctor degree in 2007 at the University of Michigan. And without further ado, we're going to have this great discussion about all of these three topics in a philosophical point of view. That'll be fun. And yeah, please feel free and enjoy this live this Zoom live from my YouTube. Let me go ahead and bring him in. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining in. I already introduced you already. That's why it took a little bit longer. And this is recorded. So could you reintroduce yourself?
Okay, my name is Rob Greißis. I'm a professor of philosophy at California State University in Northridge.
All right. And what do you specify?
What do I specialize in?
Yes.
I specialize, well, I wrote my dissertation on Immanuel Kant's philosophy of religion.
Mm-hmm.
And I nowadays specialize in the epistemology of disagreement, it's called, which is basically trying to understand why people who might both be experts in a field nonetheless disagree with each other, and what lessons non-experts should take from that. Should they is it okay to be confident about something even when the experts disagree about it, that sort of thing. And I'm also right now working on the ethics of discourse, where I'm trying to figure out how, what are good ways of talking to each other, basically speaking.
Okay. So right off the bat, what is your ethnic, racial, or just your religious background?
Well, my religious background is that I was raised Byzantine Catholic, which is
What is that?
That's so Catholicism. You've heard of Roman Catholicism, no doubt, because you, I believe, were raised Roman Catholic. But Catholicism contains actually 12 rites. Roman Catholicism is the largest, but there's other kinds of Catholic. There's Greek Catholic, Byzantine Catholic, Ruthenian Catholic, and these are much smaller branches of the Catholic Church, but they're very much branches of the Catholic Church in good standing. And Byzantine Catholic is sort of it's got the liturgy of Greek Orthodox Christianity, but it's got the doctrines of Roman Catholic Christianity. So when I was growing up in the Catholic Church, I was used to the same liturgy every week, which was a 5th century liturgy from a guy named St. John Chrysostom. Once a month, it would be sung in what's called Old Church Slavonic. So instead of saying, "And to those in the graves, and to those in the graves," it'd say, "Isu shivu rubi, Isu shivu rubi, shivu 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 darova." And so it was I don't speak Old Church Slavonic, but that's what our church was in. And it also had a lot of incense, a lot of icons, and more than Roman Catholicism, it emphasized mysticism. So Roman Catholicism is much more, probably because of people like Thomas Aquinas, it's much more rationalistic. It has definitely mystical elements to it, but I think the Byzantine Catholic version emphasizes more mystical stuff, more spiritual warfare was something also they emphasized, battling the devil, that kind of thing. And also, but the main reason my parents took me there to that church is that it didn't have as much kneeling as the Roman Catholic Church. So it was a very prosaic, a very sort of kind of basic motivation to take me to that church. As for my ethnic identity, My mother is Jewish, so I suppose that makes me Jewish too. But my father was Greek, and so I guess I'm. I mean, her people come from Lithuania, so I'm like half Lithuanian Jewish and half Greek. That's about it.
This is interesting. I have not heard about that sector of like just Byzantine Catholic. That's so interesting. Could you describe a little bit more in detail what is like the differences between Roman and your denomination that you grew up in? You did say rational, and that one is more
Yeah.
like supernaturally. So like,
Yeah.
is there more difference?
So I would say that like one big difference is that there's a lot more icons in Byzantine Catholicism, where there are statues in Roman Catholicism. I would say that because the liturgy derives from a 5th century liturgy, and not, it hasn't, like, we follow Vatican II, but we don't have like shaking hands or like giving each other hugs like you do in a Roman Catholic liturgy. But by mystical, I mean to say that there's a more emphasis on meditative states in Byzantine Catholicism than there is in Roman Catholicism. So Roman Catholics, they certainly emphasize prayer, they emphasize saying the rosary, going to confession, the sacraments, that sort of stuff, and we do too. But I think there was more of a tradition of what you might say is almost like an Eastern meditative aspect. So I did do a little bit of meditation in the Catholic Church, and that would emphasize like mantras, like you will see in, I think, some Eastern meditative traditions, where you will try to say a word over and over again as a way to kind of clear your mind. And, one of the interesting things is that one of the great Byzantine Catholic, I believe he's Byzantine Catholic theologians, a guy named Maximus the Confessor, he had a philosophy that would nowadays be known as idealistic rather than materialistic. So most people, they'll I have this a stand right here. It's used to hold iPads. Most people would say that's a thing. If everybody died, that thing would still exist. It's made out of matter, and it exists independently of us. Whereas Maximus the Confessor and other so-called idealists, they would say, whereas materialists say that matter is the fundamental thing, idealists say ideas are the fundamental thing. That's why they're called idealists, and materialists are materialists. And so Maximus the Confessor thinks that like fundamentally all that reality contains are like thoughts, feelings, sensations, and when everybody's dead, things still exist, but that's because God senses them or has thoughts about them. And so like, as it turns out, and maybe because of my Byzantine Catholic upbringing, this is a view of the world I find myself quite partial to as well, this so-called idealism. And it might also be why I got into Kant as well, because Kant is a kind of idealist. But anyway, I only, when I was growing up Byzantine Catholic, we didn't think about how we differentiated ourselves from the Roman Catholics so much. Although I would say among the rank and file Byzantine Catholics, there was more like veneration for the highest ranking official in the Greek Orthodox Church, and more interest in like relationships between the Greek Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church than there would be among most Roman Catholics, who probably didn't care very much about what happened in the Greek Orthodox Church, right? But I remember I knew a guy in Romania, from Romania, I should say, and in Romania they have this, they call Byzantine Catholics Uniates, because they try to unify the Greek Orthodox with the Roman Catholics, and he did not like Uniates. He was like, damn Uniates, like it's sort of like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, kind of thing. Pick a side. right? That's I think how some people in Romania felt. But I mean, honestly, we were Catholics, not Orthodox, not a mix either. We are Catholics. So
Mhm. This is a
um,
different world, TBH. I just coming from a Roman Catholic upbringing, like I only know that side and I also know Baptist and Lutheran,
sure,
but I never saw like there are other aspects of being Catholic. So this is like mind-boggling right now. And good information. So from your experience, and we'll get a little bit more into Kant later, but from your experience growing up into your denominational church, um, did you get a sense of what religion was, or is your personal definition of religion, is that due to the institutions, or is it religion as the subject itself?
hmm
And or just more of a better question, how did your definition of religion evolve while being a professor? Was there a difference between your personal take and then all of a sudden you got this professor point of view coming in, or how do you define religion?
yeah. Well, I'll get to how I define religion in a bit. I will to give more biographical sketch. When I grew up, I mean, I was aware, of course, that there were other religions. For one thing, my mom was Jewish and she was not a practicing Catholic.
Mhm.
But um, I wasn't somebody who who took religion super seriously. It's not as though I disbelieved it. It just I didn't think of it as something that was supposed to like control how you lived. But as it turns out, like I had lots of instinctive reactions to things that were almost certainly due to the fact that I was raised Catholic. And so, like for instance, the idea that somebody might not believe in God was like quite off-putting to me.
Yeah,
Like I
same
when
here
I when
when I was
I, when I
yeah.
discovered that some of my friends were atheists, I was like really like I would say fearful. Like it made me realize that you didn't have to believe in God. And I thought it was really important to believe in God. And so I like it made them seem kind of strange to me. And it also made me like worried about my own beliefs. Like the thought that this might not be true had never really occurred to me until I was like 15 or whatever. And then I was like, that's scary. What if it's not true? That would be really bad. And but growing up, as I got older, I got more interested in the arguments for like belief in God or against belief in God. I was much more like, I have to say, people are interested in all sorts of aspects of religion. The part I was always most interested in was arguments for and against belief in God. I was never really argument interested in like what is the nature of faith. I wasn't interested in religious language, like what like given that you can't see or smell or touch, etc., God, like, do you even know that what you're talking about makes any sense? Like, that's an issue I was never really interested in because it seemed to me, yeah, obviously it makes sense. Um, I was I was never really interested in comparative religion so much, insofar as that, like, I thought if I could prove that God existed through an argument, then that would like not make me not have to worry about, say, Buddhism or something like that.
Mhm.
And I have to say another thing I was never particularly interested in was like proving the divinity of Christ. Um, you know, a lot of Christian apologists, what they are interested in is showing not only that God exists, but that Jesus was God incarnate. And if they can prove both those things, then they can sort of ignore all the non-Christian religions. Like you don't have to study those other religions because now you've already shown that like the two fundamental truths of Christianity are true. And so now you can just restrict yourself to thinking about which form of Christianity is true. But like I was much more interested in what you might call generic theism than I was in Christian theism. So
Mhm.
like I was just interested in what is God, how do we know that God exists, and I was also, I should say, interested in the relationship between God and morality. Um,
Is there a
so
difference between those two topics, generic and Christian theology?
sure. So in philosophy, we talk about two kinds of theology, right? Theology is the study of God, and
Mhm.
there are two kinds of theology that in the Western world we've talked about, which is natural theology and revealed theology. So natural theology is sort of the study of what you can know about God just by looking at the world itself. And revealed theology is what you can know about God by looking at sacred texts in which God has allegedly revealed himself. So, it's one thing if natural theology is like, if I'm trying to know about Reuben, one thing I can do is study human physiology, right? What do all humans have in common? And I can learn a lot of things about you, but I can't learn very particular things about you that way. I'll have to actually talk to you and ask you questions and observe you in particular. And so natural theology to God is sort of like physiology to humans, and revealed theology to God is sort of like an interview with a particular human. And so, Christians think there's all sorts of things you can know about God just by studying nature, but there's all sorts of things you can't know about God unless you study the Bible, in particular the New Testament and the life of Jesus. But I was much more interested in like things you can know about God just by studying nature, as it were. And this leads to what are called the traditional theistic arguments, something called like the cosmological argument, which broadly speaking says that like the universe had to come from somewhere, so it must have come from God. So that's how we know there's a God. That's a very simple version of the cosmological argument, but that's kind of what it's like. Sorry, a cat is trying to get into the room. I will let him in.
All right.
Yeah,
that's all right.
The cat always likes it when I podcast.
And for the listeners out there, like there's construction, so you might get some construction noise. So I just can't do anything about it because it's external noise. But anyways, go ahead.
I'm going to do one thing because I have this microphone here, and I realize I have not been using it as my default speaker. So I'm going to change to that. I hope it doesn't cause any problems with the podcast. 1 second. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me better than before, or hopefully your listeners can. Yeah. So that's the kind of that's the kind of aspect of religion I was interested in for a long time. But and one other area of religion I was not interested in was, what is the definition of religion? Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons I wasn't interested in this is that if you look at the history of philosophy, you look at a lot of philosophers trying to define terms. They'll say, what is knowledge, or what is goodness? Very big terms. And it seems, with maybe one exception, that philosophers have never succeeded in giving a definition of a term that doesn't have powerful counterexamples. And so a lot of philosophers have given up trying to define terms. Mm-hmm. In case you're wondering what's the one exception, the one exception might be the word game. What is a game? There's a philosopher named Bernard Suits who a lot of people think has managed to figure out how to define what a game is without any counterexamples, but we don't have to worry about that.
That's right.
Anyway, so I was not interested in defining religion just because I didn't think, you could define anything. Plus, more important than that, like, I also didn't care like what a religion was. Like, I was much more interested in what do the things what about particular religious claims? How do we know they're true or false? And it doesn't really matter to me like what a religion is. But I will say, one of the reasons that I became interested in what is religion is that is because of political progressivism. And I started to see a lot of things people were doing that seemed to me to be quite religious, mm-hmm. and but also political. And it made me wonder whether or not like this was a new religion emerging that was supplanting some of the old, more established religions. And a linguist named John McWhorter, he recently wrote a book. I think it's called Woke Racism or something like that.
Yes, I read like the first 2 chapters, which is interesting.
Okay, yeah. And I think in that book, he argues that progressivism, or contemporary progressivism, or what you might call wokeism, which I don't love the word woke, but it's kind of hard to figure out what word to use. But he claims it really is a religion, not just metaphorically, not just like a religion, but literally a religion. And so that got me interested in trying to figure out, like, what is a religion? Like, is this a religion or not? Like, and if it is a religion, maybe that actually does matter, because if it's a religion, then how you think and talk about it, or how you respond to it, if you whether you agree with it or disagree with it, matters.
as opposed to if it's just a kind of more political thing that has to do with like particular policies and that sort of stuff. So that's how I got interested in, that's like my journey about religion. If you want a TLDR, I grew up religious. I began to wonder, how do I know it's true? I became really concerned about just the issue of God. And then as politics changed, I became more concerned about what religion itself is.
Yes, which comes in with which we're going to now speak about politics. Well, a little bit before politics, you did mention Kant. What influenced you in being in that space, that Kantian space? Like, what made you invest more of your time in undergrad or graduate school with this well-known philosopher, this German philosopher?
Yeah. So when I first encountered Kant, I was 18, and it was my first class in college. And it was this could have happened in lots of different ways, but it was the very first time I read something in English. I mean, obviously he wrote it in German, but I didn't read German at the time. And I was reading something in English, and it wasn't mathematics and it wasn't science, and yet I couldn't understand it. And that had never happened to me before. Like, I was a pretty smart kid. And so, when I read stuff in English, I could understand it. Like, it was just like talking about stuff. Like, most of the stuff I read was like politics, right? It was, just the kind of political stuff a teenage kid reads. Like, I would read National Review magazine, and I would read The Nation, I would read just political journals of opinion. And it seemed like a lot of smart people wrote for those places, and of course they did. But I figured, unless it's math or science, I'll be able to understand it. But when I found Kant, I couldn't. It was like we were assigned to read 5 pages from the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals. And I remember reading it and just beating my head against the wall and not understanding it. I spent like 2.5 hours trying to get through these 5 pages. And finally I gave up, and I started talking to my mom and my dad. And my mom and my dad were both professors. And I would read passages to them out loud, and they were also baffled. They had no idea what this was about. And I sort of got this bee in my bonnet. I'm like, I'm going to understand Kant, right? Thank God I didn't read Hegel first. I probably would have given up. But I said, I'm going to understand Kant. And so I tried to understand Kant, and I said, well, you know what? Maybe the problem is that I'm reading it in English. So I'm going to learn German. So I took a lot of courses in German. I spent a year in Germany, spent a summer in Germany trying to hone my German. And, as it turns out, that didn't help all that much. Like, it would help me settle some issues of interpretation, but it didn't make Kant easy or anything like that.
It doesn't.
And so, that's how I got into Kant. And then the thing I liked about Kant was actually his ethics. I thought, there's this view called utilitarianism. And for your audience, utilitarianism is the view that what you ought to do is maximize happiness, right? Bring about as much happiness in the world as possible. And that sounds really great. It sounds like what a good idea. But as it turns out, it's kind of sinister, because one of the things that's true about utilitarianism is they'll say, if you can sacrifice one person to make 5 people happier, you should. Not only should you, if you don't, you're doing something morally wrong. So a famous case, which some people think of as a counterexample to utilitarianism, is imagine that a perfectly healthy person comes into your office and you're a medical doctor, and this person, is fine, happy, et cetera, but you also have 5 other patients, each of whom has one organ that is about to fail. And if any of those people dies, if any of those organs fail, each of those people will die. And so basically 5 people are in critical condition. And then you look at this patient and you realize this patient has 5 organs that will save these 5 people's lives. Now, he doesn't want to die, and he's not willing to sacrifice himself for them. But that's very selfish of him, because he could save 5 people's lives, and the only person who has to die is him. So what you ought to do, if you're the doctor, is you ought to just kill this person, take his organs, and give them to the 5 patients and save their lives. Some utilitarians are like, yeah, absolutely. But most people think, oh, this is not a consequence that is good. This is a problem with the theory if it thinks that you should do this. So I found utilitarianism very compelling, but I also found it very sinister, as I said. Like, I liked the idea that you should maximize happiness, but I didn't like the idea that you should, sacrifice people for the sake of like happiness. And so I was trying to figure out a way to kind of resist the logic of utilitarianism while also respecting some of it. And the person I found who did that was Kant, because Kant thought that you should definitely, like, there are definitely all sorts of self-sacrificing things you have to do for the sake of morality. But also individuals have rights, and these rights can't be overridden, even if it would make other people really happy. To sort of put it sort of straightforwardly, you can't violate one person's rights to prevent the violation of two people's rights. That's not how rights work. It's not like you're trying to minimize rights violations. You're just trying to not violate rights. So I liked that, and that's how I got into Kant. But if you ask me, how did I write my dissertation on Kant? The story is basically, I was in graduate school, and I went from a university that was okay, but not great, to a university that was really good. So I went from being a big fish in a small pond to being a small fish in a big pond. And my self-esteem took a gigantic hit. Like, I was really not a fan of my own abilities in the first couple of years of graduate school. So I wrote a paper on Kant's theory of evil. And I also wrote a paper on Kant's criticisms of the ontological argument. And these are the only two papers I wrote in my first 2 years where the professors were like, hey, these are really good. And so I'm like, okay, I like Kant. I don't love Kant, but I like Kant. But this is where I appear to be doing my best work. So I should probably write a dissertation on Kant. So because both the papers were about like some aspect of Kant's religious philosophy, I ended up writing a dissertation on Kant's religious philosophy, even though I wasn't actually that passionate about it. But I did it because I thought it was the only thing I was good at. And so that's how I ended up getting into Kant. So like from 2005 to 2016, I focused on nothing but Kant's philosophy of religion. And so over that 11-year period, I wrote my dissertation. I wrote a few articles on it. And then by 2016, I was kind of like over Kant. But I still learned a lot, and I still remember a lot about Kant. So that's sort of how I got into Kant.
Did that lead you into Hume? Because we did speak about a little bit about Hume. Or when did Hume come about?
Hume came about, so in two ways. I took an undergraduate course on Hume. And it was on, actually, I took 2 undergraduate courses on Hume, but one of the undergraduate courses on Hume I took was about a book of his called The Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. And this book is like a play. It's very interesting, but you have 3 characters and they're all arguing about God. And this really got me interested because it was like a story, but it was also really interesting arguments about God. And, being a young Catholic guy, I was hoping the persons who would argue for God would win against the person who was arguing against God. But that's sort of not how the book played out. Not exactly. It was a very strange book. And it sort of had the guy who was arguing against God constantly win all the arguments. But in the end, he's basically like, oh no, you're right. There is a God. And so a lot of people are like, this is just Hume being ironic. And he's just sort of like trying to not, like back when Hume wrote this in the 1700s, it was published actually 3 years after his death in 1779. But he wrote it for about 20 years from like 1755 to 1776. And, Hume obviously thought this was like the most important thing he was doing. And I found it interesting, but kind of discouraging. But then I had a friend at Northridge where I teach who he told me, hey, I would love to study the dialogues more closely. And so I said, you know what, I'm teaching a course this semester. I'll just teach it on Hume's Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. So I taught the course on Hume's Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. And my friend, Tim Black, he sat in on the course with me. And we both became quite fascinated by it. And so we wrote an article about it. And one of the things we really focused on is the fact that it's like a story. And most philosophers who look at Hume's Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion are pretty much only interested in the arguments. But we thought it was really important that he puts the arguments in the mouths of characters. he doesn't just write arguments like a philosopher normally does. He wrote it as a dialogue, as a story, as like a screenplay. And so we really focused a lot of our work on what Hume was trying to say. And we thought what the thing was about was not so much the arguments, but about religious personality types. And there's, you've got your dogmatist, who's like really inflexible and is always telling people what to do, but doesn't necessarily do it himself. And you've got your skeptic, who's kind of like making a joke of everything, but can't live his life like it's a joke. And then you've got your kind of fairly devout, but kind of open-minded religious person who likes to argue about it and is willing to like listen to other people. And we thought that what this book was about how the people who are really dogmatic are quite dangerous, but they're really dangerous for religion. They're not dangerous because religion is false and it makes these people dogmatists. It's that we think Hume thinks actually there's a lot of good things about religion if you do it in the right way. And that's why at the end of the book, the guy who we thought, most people think is against religion has this kind of change of heart, because it actually has to do not so much with the arguments as it has to do with like the friendship that he has with the other person, and how Hume's basic point is for a religion to be really good and useful, it has to encourage open dialogue and open inquiry and like attentiveness to your experiences and stuff like that. It's not just about arguments, it's about experiences, and it's about what it does for your character. So that's what we sort of concluded. So that's how I got into Hume. I got into Hume, a TLDR. I got into Hume because I read him as an undergraduate. I was like very discouraged by him. I thought, I can't respond to these arguments. They're really scary. And then I read him again as a professor, and I thought, oh, he's doing something totally different that I didn't even realize.
Before we go to the area of politics, one last, well, this can be also political too. This question is, I'm not sure if you read Time magazine or you've seen a cover of Time magazine back in 1968, or like when you go online and stuff. But this question was online, I guess. It was somewhere like, I know I read it in NPR and Political, that younger generations are like moving away from religion. And that brought me back to the Time magazine, came out back in 1968 with God is Dead, and with the Enlightenment era, where people were also scared because no one is believing in God anymore, or like in that sense. With these time periods, do you think that like the question is, the question that was given to us, was that an appropriate question? Or do you think that younger people are finding their religious beliefs somewhere else that does not involve the divinity in terms of like, the religious institutions themselves?
Yeah. So just for your listeners, I don't know if you asked this question about is God dead to all your guests, but what the question means is basically, have people stopped believing in God? Mm-hmm. And this is actually a really interesting philosophical question. One I wasn't interested in when I was younger, but I got more interested in as I became older, which is, what does it mean to believe something anyway? Mm-hmm. It's very easy to say you believe something, but imagine somebody says, I'm a vegetarian, but whenever you see them eat, they're always eating meat. It's like, well, what do you mean you're a vegetarian? And then they say, well, I believe it's morally wrong to eat animals. And then you say, yeah, but you always eat animals, like every meal. More than most people, you eat animals. And they say, I know, but I still think it's wrong for me to do it. And then you might be like, that's kind of strange. Like, if you think it's wrong, but you constantly do it, do you really think it's wrong? And so you can raise the same question about God. So a lot of people say they believe in God, but do they act like they believe in God? And what does it even mean to act like you believe in God anyway? And so I think the Time magazine cover, is God dead? It's echoing a statement made by Nietzsche, the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, in a book called Thus Spake Zarathustra, in which there's this character, the madman, who sort of says God is dead. He runs around screaming and he says, it's our job now to bury him. And what I think Zarathustra was written in the 1870s. And I think what the character was getting at was that even though we say we believe in God, we actually don't anymore. We now act as though we don't. And so eventually it's going to dawn on us that we no longer believe in God. And once that realization happens, we're going to have to find some other justification for why we have the beliefs we do. And let me give you an example. A lot of people believe that everybody has human rights and everybody's of equal value. If you believe in God, there's a very straightforward reason you can give for why this is true, which is, well, everybody was created in the image and likeness of God. And what God cares about is not how smart you are or how socially useful you are, but God sort of loves you because of your innate worth. And, as long as you conduct yourself like, well, you might say, as long as you take Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, or as long as you conduct yourself in a morally upright way, or as long as you follow the laws that God has established, whatever, fill it in based on the religion you have. As long as you do that, then you've discharged your obligation, which is basically to love and serve God. And that's a very egalitarian view. But if there is no God, how do you justify the claim that everybody has like equal worth and that everybody has inviolable rights? And, definitely philosophers have tried to do that. But it's not an obvious truth that everybody is of equal worth and that everybody has inviolable rights. And it might just be a holdover from our Christian heritage. And so once we finally get rid of that, if we ever do, then maybe the way we do politics is going to radically change. And we will no longer believe in equal rights and no longer believe in equal worth and that kind of stuff. And I have met philosophers who basically say, yeah, I don't believe in it because what's the basis? Why would everybody be of equal worth? Look at people. They're all so different. They all do different things. They all, like, some are a lot smarter than others. Some are a lot stronger than others. Some just are much more socially useful than others. Why think they're all of equal worth? Why think they all should have equal rights? I have heard that from other philosophers. But anyway, in answer to your question, do I think that younger people are leaving religion? Or do I think instead they're just having a new religion? This is going to really depend on how you define religion. Mm-hmm. So let me open my door because, again, a cat is yelling to get in or out. It's the cats are okay. So let me. There's this guy named Kevin Shilbrack. He wrote a book called Philosophy and the Study of Religions. It's a good book. And in the book, he gives a chapter sort of like giving an overview of the history of thinking about what is a religion. It's a very useful overview. But if I'm going to boil it down, there's three options for what is a religion. One is religion is something that has to do with how you behave. The other one is religion is something to do with how you believe. And the last one is religion is something to do with both how you believe and how you behave. And so let me give you a kind of more specific example. Let's say you think a religion has to do with how you behave. In particular, a religion is something that gives people a shared sense of meaning, and so it binds people together. So basically, anytime you're part of a group where you have a common goal, and you all know you share this common goal, and you're all acting together, that's a religious organization. The problem with this definition is that, like, most organizations become religious organizations. What it means is that, like, a sports fan, the sport he's a fan of is his religion, or somebody who's like really devoted to his business, that's his religion. There's a theologian named Paul Tillich, and what Tillich says is that religion is whatever is of ultimate concern to you. So, like, whatever you care about most, that's your religion. There's another writer named David Foster Wallace. He says everybody worships. It's just, what do they worship? And so on this view, basically everybody's religious. Christianity is a religion, but Greenpeace is also a religion, at least for some people. The Buffalo Bills are a religion for some people. Politics is a religion for some people. And so on this view, there's no such thing as a society that's more or less religious than any other society. Every society is equally religious. It's just, what are they religious about? So in answer to, if this is your definition of religion, then are you asking, are young people less religious now than they used to be? The answer is, of course not. It's impossible to be less religious because everybody always has something that's of greatest importance to them. And then since everybody is like that, then every society is equally religious.
Yeah.
To some people, that seems like a bad consequence. Like, it seems like if you just look at it, some societies are more religious than other societies. So if you look at Sweden, it doesn't seem to be as religious as like Iran or something, or India. And it looks like some people in America are more religious than other people in America. So like, you might want to give a different definition of a religion. And so a different definition of religion is not like something that gives you meaning or something that helps you behave in unity with other people. It's just like there are certain beliefs that are religious beliefs. So if you believe in a soul, that's a religious belief. If you believe in God, that's a religious belief. If you believe in anything supernatural, that's religious. And if that's your definition of religious, like, you don't even have to act in any particular way. Like, you could be somebody who says, yes, there's a God, but I don't care about him. And it's of no concern to me. And I'm just going to act as if there's no God, but I do believe there is a God. That person would count as religious on this definition. Whereas somebody who, like, there are people out there like what I'm about to describe. There are people who are atheists who like go to church every week. And like, maybe they're trying to become believers, right? Or maybe it just is really meaningful for them to take part in these ceremonies and sing these songs and that kind of stuff. Or maybe they're very sophisticated and they think, well, actually, what exists or not is just a matter of like social consensus. So does God exist? Well, no more or no less than money exists. So does money exist? Sure, but it only exists because of social consensus, right? Some people like say stuff like that. But anyway, on this second view of religion, where you're religious depending on what you believe, then somebody who goes to church every week but doesn't believe in the supernatural, that person's not religious. Similarly, there are Orthodox Jews out there who they believe that all it takes to be a good Jew is to just do the things good Jews do. You can be an atheist, you can be not believe in an afterlife, whatever. As long as you follow the law, you're a good Jew. And on this view of religion, they're not religious. That also seems wrong, right? It seems to make it like, it seems to me they are religious, maybe strangely so.
Here.
But like on this second view, they're not religious because they don't have the religious beliefs. And it also seems weird to me to say that somebody who believes in God but acts just like the most hedonistic person in the world is religious simply because he believes in God, because, well, it's not doing anything for him. So that leads to like a third view, which is that to be religious is to act religiously in response to your religious beliefs. So like, it's for your religious beliefs to be the source of ultimate concern for you, right? So on this view, like on the second view, by the way, where religion is just about what you believe, yes, young people are becoming less religious, arguably, because at least if you understand religion as requiring belief in the supernatural, maybe young people aren't believing in the supernatural as much as they used to. Although it's not entirely clear, right? As I think we said, you talked to me about this earlier, a lot of people nowadays say, I'm going to ask the universe to help me out with this.
I have a beef with them. Oof.
Yeah, you have a beef with them,
ironic.
but arguably they're behaving that arguably that is a religious belief.
Yes, and then they say,
so,
I'm not religious, or I'm just spiritual. I'm like, come on, just pick a lane. I know.
Yeah.
They get me hot and bothered.
Well, I mean, they might like there are groups of people in the past, like American Indians, who it's not clear that they believed in God like a personal being, but did believe that like nature was divine.
Yeah.
And so they might say, I'm going to let, the wind or the sun, and if you ask them, does the sun like, does it have a personality? Does it like, it's like turn-ons include fire, turn-offs include ice. It's like, I bet they would say, well, no, it's not like that. It's like a force that like acts in the interest of the universe or something like that. And that, I think, is a religious belief and maybe sort of close to what the people who say, I'm going to ask the universe of this. But maybe those people are people who like don't know what they think. They might, if you ask them what do you mean by that, maybe some of them will say, oh, it's just like saying God bless you, right? It doesn't mean you believe in God. It's just like a habit. Or maybe they'll say, yeah, it's a kind of a hope that maybe something is out there.
Or they say like it's good karma too, and I'm like, okay, then what is karma? So it's
so you can ask about the mechanisms
like
of karma.
50-50,
Yeah, there's actually a name for this view. I believe it's a Dutch term. I believe the word for something in Dutch is jets, and it's called jetsism, somethingism, and the view is that there's something out there that it makes sense to like venerate, but I can't tell you anything more than that, right? I just think that like, there's more to life than just what science tells us, but I don't know what, right? That's a view that some people might have, and that's called, I think, Yetzism. Is that a religious view? Maybe because maybe people who believe that, it gives them hope, right? That maybe there's more to life than just this body. Maybe there's more to life than just a cold, uncaring universe. But going back to the third view, right? Like on this view, a religious belief is something that like goes beyond what science tells you, maybe goes beyond what your senses tells you. If you think, yeah, there's real stuff out there, but I can't sense it with my like senses, and I can't prove it with science, but I still think I have good reason to believe it's there. And because I have good reason to believe it's there, I think it says, I think I should act in certain ways in response to that. That would be a religious person on this third view. So now I think, the devil is in the details here. What would count as a religious belief on this view? Like if I say racism is wrong, and it's wrong regardless of what anybody else thinks, even if everybody in the world thought that racism was right, it would still be wrong. And I asked this person, why? Like, how could that be true? And they say it's true because it's just a fact. Like the universe has scientific facts, but it also has moral facts. And it's a moral fact that racism is wrong. And it doesn't depend on anything about humans. It just depends on how the universe is. Well, maybe that's a religious belief, right? Maybe because that's, going beyond what your senses can tell you, and that's going beyond what science can tell you. Maybe that's a religious belief. And if that's a religious belief, and a person says, because I have this belief, I'm going to strongly condemn racism wherever I see it and not act in a racist way, maybe then that would be a religious person. I don't know. But like the devil's in the details, as I said, because my own view is that just merely believing that there are certain truths about morality, merely believing that, I don't think is a religious belief personally. I don't think that. I think religious has to be more than that, more than just like, if I say 2 + 2 = 4 and it's true no matter what anybody thinks, and that's, you can't like prove that through science, right? Beliefs about mathematics are what allow us to do science. It's not like we get to mathematics from science. We get science from mathematics. And so like if somebody thinks mathematics, all mathematical statements, are really true, right? It's not just like a game we invent and, a system of rules that happens to describe reality. They think, no, it's really true. And it's like, would be true in any universe, no matter how the world was. I don't think that's religious either. So anyway, I think if you ask me what's religion, I think it has to do with hope. It has to do with behavior, and it has to do with belief. Like if you want to hope for something, you have to believe it's possible. Otherwise, you can't really hope for it. I can't hope that 2 + 2 is one day going to equal 5. I literally can't hope it. Like even if I try to hope it, I can't because I don't believe it's possible. But like if you say, I hope that there's life after death, I can hope that because I do think it's possible. But if I thought it wasn't possible for there to be life after death, I wouldn't even be able to hope for it. Right. So I think religion has to do with what you can hope, and what you can hope has to do with what you believe. But also, like, I think religion also has to be the view that you should act in certain ways. And if you act in certain ways, you will make this hope more likely to be true. And I think that has to be part of what it is religion. Like your behaviors have to have something to do with like the things you hope for.
Yeah.
And so do I think young people are religious. Um, I want to write about this. I haven't written about it, but I kind of think, that progressivism is a religion on this view, and that it has like an end time. Just like Christians believe that there will be a general resurrection of the dead where everybody comes back to life in the very, 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 very far future, maybe in a different world. Mm-hmm. So too do I think a lot of progressives believe in a future where maybe we'll overcome white supremacy and systemic racism, and then they don't really say what'll happen then. Yeah. But I think they thought is that the world will be a much better place, maybe even a utopia. It's not clear, like that isn't too often described, like, and for good reason, right? If I say here's what it would take for me to be happy, well, then people might try to do that. And then what if they do it? And what if I'm still not happy? Right? You don't want that. So you have to keep it vague.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And this comes to the political section. Like, yes, I don't want there to be racism and classism or any isms or just oppression and abuse in general, but I'm of a mindset that it's gonna happen anyways. So it's because someone has, they are attracted to power, they're attracted to money, they're attracted to, having this platform. They will do things, and when money comes, obviously people might be inclined to be a bit corrupted and so on and so forth, and then they can be complicit. So it's very systemic when you look at it. And progressives, yes, they want to, I view it as this, like, progressives want to live in this utopic world. Go right on ahead. But from someone that is like pretty much someone that is, I consider myself more of a realist, not like 100% because I want to have a leeway in, but as a realist, it's bad things are going to happen, period, because that's what life is. And even with psychology, because I study psychology, how do we manage when we have so much obstacles? And this is why I like Viktor Frankl, because when he was in the concentration camps, like, he saw everything in the concentration camps. He saw hell. So basically he was in hell. And how could he survive while living in hell? He saw politics in hell. He saw religion in hell. He saw sexuality in hell. He basically saw life in hell because, being in the concentration camp is fucking hell itself. But he took I think he had like a diary where he wrote a lot of things. And for him, that diary was like a life support. Like, I have this thing that I can write and all my thoughts, and now people can see my existence and how I lived through this ordeal, through this hell. But for some reason, I guess he went outside. When it came back, the book was gone. So the book was a blueprint to, his safety, or his savior. But when it was gone, he still thought, and he said that we still have autonomy and we still have our essence, and that even even if through hellish things, we can still maneuver around and be our true authentic self. Maybe I'm like wording it wrong, but I understand that like 100%. So it's, how do we maneuver and manage obstacles, even if everything is like, even if we're wronged by everything, how could we stand and move forward? And going back to like what progressives want to do, I understand. I also want to live. I also don't want this to happen, but it's like they make it very cookie cuttery, more like a childlike point of view. Mm-hmm. And how do you manage to how do you see it basically? Because you did say that progressives are like religious in that way, but there's a few progressives out there that don't say they are religious because of systemic issues within these religious institutions. Which, my other question is, do you think religious institutions are a hotbed of political action that oppress people or also give people hope?
So I think one of the things that you've put your finger on is a kind of interestingly different way that maybe a lot of contemporary conservatives are being religious, and a way contemporary progressives are being religious. So I'm going to give like a very, I'm sure, overly simple sketch of what life in America is like. But here's my overly simple sketch. So you have some very important institutions that are responsible for how we make sense of ourselves. So schools, academia, government, Fortune 500 companies, and the media, right? Hollywood media, most news media.
And this too podcast, because it's the media as well.
This is part of the media, but this is actually, I actually find it important to exempt this podcast from it, because these institutions all, broadly speaking, share a similar ideology, right? What you might call woke progressivism or social justice politics or whatever, where to give a very brief sketch of this ideology, it's that white supremacy is sort of fundamental to how this country runs. Because this country is white supremacist, its institutions are systemically, I should say, racist. Because its institutions are systemically racist, it's responsible for great racial disparities. And because of these great racial disparities that result from the normal operations of our institutions, what the obligation of every individual is to be anti-racist, right? If you are not actively opposing these institutions, you are tacitly supporting these institutions. Described like this, it looks very anti-institutional. And I do think that people who are progressive think of themselves as rebellious and anti-institutional. But what's interesting is that the commanding heights of all the controlling institutions in our country believe the same thing, right? So it's this kind of, all the institutions are saying be anti-institutional, which should give you pause. It should make you think, do they really want you to be anti-institutional? No. And when the institution they're telling you to be against is something as sort of vague and amorphous as white supremacy and systemic racism, then it's sort of easier to see now why they might have this same view, because it's a kind of vague threat and it's not entirely clear how you're against it. Like, how do you be anti-racist, right? There's a guy named Ibram X. Kendi who's very, very well known, who wrote a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I guess it's a kind of manual. But like, you have these people who control the institutions and they say, you know, we're anti-institutional. And so the people who say that and who follow it, on the one hand, sort of believe themselves to be anti-institutional, but are very much part of a bigger institution. And so I think if you're progressive, it's much easier to sort of like feel like to want to be a part of the institutions in society, and to like want to say, yeah, those institutions are anti-institutional. I want to be part of them, right? They're anti-systemic racism. I want to be part of them. And by anti-systemic racism, what I mean is they say they are, right? They're constantly announcing that we're against it and we're in favor of anti-racism and stuff like that. But if you have that outlook, I think being like thinking of religion in social terms makes a lot of sense to you, right? I want to be part of this social project. But if you're a conservative, chances are you're going to feel alienated from almost all of society's major institutions. You might not feel alienated from the police. You might not feel alienated from the military, but if you actually follow those institutions closely, you actually might even feel alienated from them too, for the very same reasons you feel alienated from, you know, the NBA or Harvard University or the New York Times or whatever. And so chances are you're not gonna find it as easy to like want your religiosity to be social. You're going to basically feel like, you know, I can't rely on these social institutions because I disagree with the way they see the world so utterly. So then you might find yourself more drawn to individual solutions, right? So just like you said, oppression is bad, but it's never really going to go away. And I agree with you. Like, I can't see how it could go away short of like abolishing humanity. You know, somebody said, for instance, hate is bad. So let's have a world where nobody hates each other. It sounds nice, but how do you get it?
Exactly.
Right?
It's like, how, oh my gosh, it's like, how could you get from there? Yes, I know. But then again, for me, like as someone that has been through obstacles in my life, there are things that there are people I hated, but it was that hatred that was more that gave me like a survival mode to get through something. Can this is also like a philosophy question, but can hate be a motivational factor? Well, not hate, but like anger. They go anger. Can anger be a motivational factor in terms of survival? Getting yourself out there and just trying to live your day, even though you come through a hellish situation, just like basically like Viktor Frankl did. So it's I'm not saying that he had hate in his heart or just anger. I mean, well, I would say that he had anger because he was in the Holocaust, but I think he used that anger to be a motivational factor for him to for him to lessen the hatred in society or just lessen anger, but still use it as a tool to bring meaning to others that are in similar situations. So for me, when I listen to like hate is not welcome here, hate, like we deter hate, but what is the meaning of hate in your situation? Like my meaning of hate is like different than yours, but when someone says hate is not welcome, then it's like, what if I hate someone right now? Or like, am I welcoming your space? Even though I mean well, I'm not like, obviously, I'm not all of these isms, but what if I just hate what happened to me 2 seconds ago? Am I not welcoming your space? So it's just like I mentioned, like progressives like that just irk me so much because it's more of a childlike mentality. So yeah, so go ahead on that.
Okay, so I have a lot to say in response to this. So the first thing to note is that most people do have a childlike mentality. And that's, I mean, I suppose it's a bad thing, but it's not unexpected, right? Most people, the stuff they know in great nuance is the stuff that is very directly relevant to how they live their lives. And this is not always true, but this is often true. And so somebody is going to be, I think, much more rational about the way they buy a house or a car than they are going to be about how they vote, because how you vote really has very little impact on your life or anyone's life, whereas how you buy a car or how you buy a house will have a huge impact on your life. So it's obvious that you have to think about this decision more carefully. And so like how people buy houses is not polarized, right? There's not like Republican house buyers and Democratic house buyers. Everybody's pretty careful about how they buy a house, regardless of their politics. Now, I just say that as an interlude because it helps to explain why hate, like when somebody says hate is not welcome here, the first thing I think when I hear somebody say that, which is literally a slogan, right? It's a cliche, it's a slogan. It's not like saying that is not evidence of original thought or anything like that.
It's not.
I tend to think people who say that are generally some of the most hateful people I've ever met. They're very angry at a lot of people in society and have a lot of contempt for them. When they say hate is not welcome here, I think what they mean is that there are certain political views that they find intrinsically hateful, and those political views are not welcome here. But hating those political views is totally cool and in fact great. Now, getting back to hate, getting back to hate gets us back to what I was saying earlier about how progressives and conservatives in society might be differently religious, which is that if you think the dominant social institutions are on your side, you're going to be more friendly towards a kind of social project. Whereas if you think the dominant institutions are against you, you're going to be more skeptical of social projects and probably are going to be more individualistic. I think that's why Jordan Peterson has a lot of uptake among conservatives, because he gives a very individualistic life advice, right? Stand up straight, clean your room, that kind of stuff. Whereas, other people who are sort of more progressive, they want to be part of a movement, right? I know growing up as a conservative, I was always very skeptical of movements, simply because like all the movements that had high profiles were ones that either had values that quite differ from mine, or were absolutely reviled by the mainstream media. Like there was the pro-life movement, but people weren't saying they were admirable because they're a movement. They were saying this is a movement of people who want to strip women of their rights. And so like I didn't want to like join a movement if it meant I had to like be further reviled by society. So like so going to hate, there's actually a philosopher named Maisha Cherry who has written a book in defense of hatred. And she calls it Lordian hatred. There's a poet named Audre Lorde who defended a kind of hatred, in particular, a hatred that was such that it would result in social change. Now, this again is something that if you're a progressive is going to be more inspiring to you, because I think you're going to think that social movements are generally things you like, right? Because most social movements are progressive because they get like institutional support. Whereas, you know, again, even as I say these things, I realize I'm very much oversimplifying, but this is just a kind of thesis I'm spinning out here.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Whereas if you're a conservative, I think Lordian hate, right? Hatred designed to bring about a change. It's just not going to be how you're going to hate. You're not going to hate like injustice. It's so vague. You're going to hate like particular peoples. You're going to hate Anthony Fauci, right? You're going to hate Nancy Pelosi. You might hate the Democratic Party. And when you hate these things, you probably don't think your hatred is going to result in these things going away.
No.
And so I think for a conservative, hatred isn't often Lordian hate. Hatred is the kind of hatred that's just like, I'm obsessed with these people. I hate them. I hate the power they have over me. And it's going to be very unhealthy for a conservative to be hateful. I think it might be healthy for progressives to be hateful, but not so much for conservatives, because conservatives' hate isn't going to do anything. I mean, I could be wrong, right? Arguably they elected Trump, but like the thing is that I see Trump not as somebody who's going to bring about social change. I see Trump as somebody who messes everything up, like who tries to throw a monkey wrench into the works and tries to create chaos. And I think if you think that all the institutions are against you, what you're more interested in is chaos, right? You're more interested in tearing things down rather than trying to work within the system because you've given up on the system. And so, yeah, I think I said earlier that like basically conservatives, like Republicans, they don't, again, I'm overgeneralizing, but I don't feel like they have policies anymore. They just have antagonisms. And I feel like progressives have lots of policies, often quite unrealistic, but also quite unpopular too. Like they just assume everybody agrees with them about very
they just assume the assumption that that irks me too.
Well, I mean, it's not without basis in fact, because so much of the time people are in an internet bubble, right? They're on Twitter, they're talking to each other on Twitter, and they get the sense, right? They block those people they don't like, they mute those people they don't like, they just follow people they do like. The only people who disagree with them they follow are like the people who are lunatics, and they like to follow those people because it's just very amusing to see people you disagree with say stupid stuff. Like it just further confirms your view of them as terrible people. And so it's very easy to sort of convince yourself that nobody could possibly disagree with you. And then when you're like totally destroyed at the ballot box, you're like, oh my gosh, this country is evil and terrible. I think there was a woman named Joy Reid who's on
MSNBC. She said a lot of things.
Yeah, and I think she said, you know, like this country's appetite for white supremacy is insatiable or something like that.
Yeah, and then again, like Virginia literally voted for Biden like by 10 points, and they also voted for Hillary. So like it's like racism isn't like that. It's like how oh my gosh. And then also like Cory Bush also said that like, you know, that Joe Manchin, when they voted on this horrible bill, this infrastructure bill that doesn't quite give anything, well, even if it does, like minimal, lackluster, minimal, the progressives literally folded. And after they folded, like majority of the progressive caucus folded, and all of a sudden they went and attacked Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. And I'm like, but at least they were consistent. And they said, oh, Joe Manchin is anti-women, anti-white, like they want.
Wait, anti-white?
Anti-women, anti-black.
Oh, anti-black, okay.
Yes. And yeah, just all those antis and anti whatever it was. But I was like, wow, you guys folded right before you guys went on to Mansion and Cinema. And I'm like, well, at least they're consistent. And yes, it's like how, and for me, I'm like, yes, I also bitch about Mansion and Cinema, but at least what they're doing, it's consistent. Whereas with Progressive, they just tout, and then at the end, they folded. And even AOC, she folded like twice. And it's I don't know
Well,
how long ago this, but like yeah.
I think this might get to something, which is that like, there's this view out there that words can harm, right? And harm in a very real sense, right? If you hear something that offends you, it'll raise your blood pressure, it'll cause the release of stress hormones. These things have damaging effects on your tissue. And so like literally words can literally hurt you, is I think a view. And so I think this is part of the reason why there's so much emphasis among progressives for representation, right? Making sure that media products have enough gender, demographic diversity, that kind of stuff. And also why the view that the words you say are very important and, can traumatize people, can trigger people, these kinds of things. Like there's lots of reasons why these views have come to dominate. Like maybe one reason is that representation is actually kind of easy. Like it's not hard to get a lot of Black actors in movies, more than there used to be. But the thing is that I actually don't think words are all that important in terms of affecting people's well-being. Like if you hear a term that you don't like if you hear the word Latino instead of Latinx, I don't think it's actually doing that much damage to you. Whereas the material conditions are actually quite important, like how much money you have, how much healthcare you have, what kind of education you have. And this is, again, me, I'm sure, dramatically oversimplifying, because to be honest, I don't quite know what you're talking about when you're talking about the progressives folded. I guess they originally had a $4 trillion goal they wanted, and then they folded down to 1.2 trillion or something like that.
And then they folded again. So like they kept like, and then towards the end, they said that they're getting it through. They're just waiting for Joe Biden to give them 2 more votes. And I'm like, wait, so your stance was like, we will keep fighting until we get our voices heard. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, now we're waiting for Joe Biden to give us 2 votes. And it's like, so that went against what you guys were doing.
Yeah. Okay. So that sounds like ass covering then. But I mean, I suppose if you think that words have this much power, then you don't really have any tools in your arsenal, because you just focus on how you phrase things and what terms you use. And then you're not as good at actually getting political victories and forming coalitions and that kind of stuff, especially if you think that associating with people who you think of as bad taints you, right? If there's a guilt by association. I do sometimes see people say stuff like, I can't believe you liked that tweet, right? As though that does anything, right? But I suppose the thought is that liking a tweet shows that you have sympathy for somebody who's quite unsympathetic, and so that stains you somehow. But one thing I want to make clear when I keep on beating up on progressives is that I think it's quite possible to think of progressivism not as leftist, or at least not as very leftist, because traditionally leftists have focused on things like, if you're a communist, right?
Yeah.
Abolishing the private ownership of capital, right? Or, massively increasing taxes, or massively expanding the welfare state, increasing regulations about how businesses are run and that kind of stuff. I don't know how much. I mean, there's some appetite for that. Like some people say, something like 52% of millennials describe themselves as socialists, though I don't know what they mean by socialist. I don't know if they know what they mean by socialist. But yeah, I think that we're in a kind of unpleasant pattern here, where not that much is happening, as it were, in the world of ideas. Very interesting ideas, for policy proposals are happening. And just, there has been now a point we have reached where being very extreme in how you talk gets you a lot of attention.
It gives you a lot of clout.
Yeah. and clout, well, it doesn't, in a certain sense, it doesn't actually give you clout because you can't cause things to change, but it gives you clout in the sense that it gives you a lot more Twitter views, right? It gives you a lot more attention. And so, like, I'm sure if there's anybody who's progressive who's listening to me talk, they're going to think I'm a crank, and maybe I am a crank. But
who cares? Who cares?
yeah,
like,
no, I just
in my platform, I've told people I'm a conservative, a little bit left from what majority of the conservative people are. And if you if you badmouth progressives in here, it's okay. And so
yeah, no, I mean, I just one of the things I like to think of myself as being is fair. Maybe I haven't been fair, but because, somebody would say, what about the Trumpist right? And let me just reiterate, I identify them with forces of chaos, right? I don't love forces of chaos either. It's just that, like, I was trying to give a diagnosis for why it happened. But anyway, how this relates to religion, to go back to the original topic of the conversation, is that I think one question you might ask is this: if progressivism is a religion, why now, right? Why not earlier? Why not in the 70s? Why not in the 80s? And there's two answers to that. One answer is arguably it was a religion. It just was a different religion. It was called Marxism. And Marxism has a lot of remarks of religion too, right? It has its sacred figures. It has its end time, right? When everybody has reached the communist utopia, it has its bad guys, which is the bourgeoisie and the capitalist running dogs, right? It has its like good versus evil. It has its theory of history, right? Instead of having a providential God, it's got the history of the class struggle that will eventuate in the rule by the proletariat, right? It had a lot of features of religiosity, and it inspired a lot of people. It was easy to understand. And there was crude, arguably the same thing is happening with progressivism, and it's a kind of religion. And both cases, perhaps what's happening is that people are trying to find a new source of values if they're no longer convinced by the traditional religious organizations, right? I think there are more maybe this isn't true, but I think it's true. I think conservatives, political conservatives in America, are more traditionally religious than progressives are. I think you're going to find more evangelical Christians who are conservative, and when it comes to Orthodox Jews, it probably is true. And so I think that, like, one of the reasons to the extent conservatives don't make a religion of their politics, it might be because more progressive people, because they believe in the institutions, right? And like they believe in follow the science. And a lot of scientists are not religious, right? A lot of scientists are quite explicitly atheistic, and they think belief in the supernatural is superstitious. I'm guessing a lot of progressives are quite moved by that, and so don't find traditional religions to be as attractive anymore because some of the people they trust think that those things aren't true. And so they're going to look for something else that can give them the same kind of meaning as those religions do. But the thing is that, getting your meaning from politics means that your happiness and your self-esteem is very precarious, because with religion, it's not like front page news, today the devil beat God, hopefully God will beat the devil in 4 years, right? That doesn't happen to you. Whereas if you are progressive, it does happen to you. Like Trump was the devil and he beat an angel, right? Hillary Clinton. And then the devil lost to an angel, Joe Biden. And this will keep on happening, right? So I saw lots and lots of progressives crying on the day Trump was elected. And, this was, I kind of get it, but like, that's not how I react to elections. Like I was quite used to the people I liked losing elections and being vilified by most of the people in the culture. And so I just got used to it, right? I got used to losing. And I think when you think so much is at stake in politics, then losing is like cataclysmic. It's apocalyptic. And I think more and more conservatives are also starting to feel that way about politics too, which I don't think of as a good thing, but at least not for their mental health.
For me, like you did say something about like 2016. Like when 2016 happened, I was just mad because someone that is just a reality television star and is the elite, but for some reason he sold himself as an elite, won. And as a conservative, I'm like, wait, aren't we about these values that should like I want someone who, if they become president, at least I want them to have like some receipts, obviously. Like I want them to have like, okay, I want them, like I want to know if they done if they were like part of like city council, and then like local government, and then all of a sudden over to like national government. So I just wanted some experience. There you go. But with Trump, the reason I didn't like him is because he didn't have any experience in government. He just was this person on television. He was a Democrat. He gave money to the Democratic Party. And then he went quote independent, and then now he's a Republican. I'm like, I've been a Republican since childhood, because I come from a lineage of Eisenhower Republicans, Rockefeller Republicans, where there's very little of us, but which is also a reason why like I'm still going to hold on to that republicanism, because I don't want these people that came out of nowhere and use Trump as their Lord and Savior to kick me out. And yes, I talk, like I call out McConnell, Lindsey Graham. I call out corrupt people in both parties, because I just want there to be two robust systems, two healthy systems, actually two parties. If the consensus is it's just going to be two parties, all right, let's make it healthy, and we will have disagreements where it can benefit majority of the people, because democracy. And so now you have this one party that's overrun by lunatics. And then you have people saying, see, at least we're not like Republicans. At least we're not like this. So you should come over, people who are independents. Come over to our party because we're not them. Whereas what I view is like, that's an easy way for autocracy. That's an easier way for autocracy to spring up and rule. And I'm like, as a conservative, I'm against that. I'm against autocracy. And then for like the conservative thing when that happens is to actually bring on radical change, to shift it back to the middle, where everyone can agree majority of the time on what policies we should move forward. But no, now it's like Democrats, who also are corrupt too, Democrats are just saying, they're trying to say, at least we're not like those Republicans. And they love to overgeneralize us Republicans. And I'm like, just because you have the lunatics in positions of power, you don't see the vast vicissitudes of like middle America, people that are farmers. I'm all for workers. I'm pro-union. I'm pro-workers. Up the union. But it's like Democrats are not union. They just bring so much benefits into a job. That way, there isn't a means for you to have a union. If we're talking about union rights, like yes, you guys have all of this mental health. You guys all have all of that, but when a union springs up, it's like they get all defensive. So for me, it's like give us union rights. Yes, like my voice is important, and so regardless of which institute I'm going, yes, I want to know if that institute are pro-union as well, regardless if it's like a democratic an institution run by Democrat. But yeah, I know I'm going a little bit more further, but yes, the autocracy thing, I don't like the language right now, because it's a lot easier to have an autocracy, and then it'll be one party rules everything. And that's like, I'm so against that. I people should be against that too,
I think people would be, but like it's happening gradually, right? Like, yeah, it's starting to become kind of worrying that I feel maybe this is just a feeling and it's not rooted in reality, but I feel as though more and more people are starting to think of the Republican Party as illegitimate and dangerous. and such that like I've heard more and more people say stuff like we should like get rid of Fox News, like the government should close it down because it's such a source of misinformation and propaganda that it's tearing democracy apart.
Even CNN.
And like, you know, in Europe they have outlawed certain right-wing parties, right? But of course that didn't stop their problem with right-wing parties. You know, those parties are getting more and more popular in Europe. And I just think it's a worrying development in a democracy when you have a two-party system, but one of the parties is considered like illegitimate by many of the smartest political observers. Now, here's the thing. I do think there are more lunatics in the Republican Party than in the Democratic Party. And so
which is
I'm not
sad
saying
as fuck, which is so sad.
Right. I'm not saying that their fears about the Republican Party as being dangerous and illegitimate are totally unfounded.
Mm-hmm.
But the alternative is like what's the end goal here? Is it? I mean, I'm guessing to steelman the arguments of these people, they would say, look, we would like it if the Republican Party as it is currently constituted didn't exist, and we would like there to be a party that replaced it that was more sensible. And that's probably what they want. But then the question is, you know, what sort of views are within the bounds of reasonable discourse? And you can say all you want that like certain views are beyond debate, right? Like take the view that the election was rigged, right, or stolen. Yeah, I think it probably wasn't stolen.
Of course,
very likely it wasn't stolen, but fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of Americans hold that view. Mm-hmm. And you can't just rule it out by fiat. Like you have to, like, I realize people who have explained how it wasn't stolen have explained themselves over and over again. But yes, that is what you have to do. You have to keep on explaining yourself over and over and over again. And you have to be willing to debate people who disagree with you. And I feel as though there is a kind of, I'm sure in about 2 years, I'll think, I'm crazy. Why did I ever think this? But I feel as though there's more of a danger to our staying a single nation or being a democracy than there used to be. Now, of course, just because there's more of a danger doesn't mean it's a very large danger. Maybe it went from like a 0.1% chance of autocracy to a 5% chance of autocracy, which is still a low chance, but it's significantly bigger, right? And it's not so low that it couldn't happen, right? But, you know.
But the uptick is what's worrying them.
Yeah. I'm a little bit, and it's not the sort of thing, like I said, it's not like the people who say the Republican Party has become a danger to democracy aren't totally out of their minds. Like there is some basis for thinking that when you have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, you know, being a representative and having strange conspiracy theories. And quite frankly, when you have people like Trump, who was espousing conspiracy theories like that vaccines cause autism. Like he never did out and out say that, but he was pretty sympathetic to that view. And, you know, so like it's a unsettling place we're in, I think. And, you know, to what extent that's due to there being a religion, a new religious movement that has disgusted a lot of people and caused them to act in an anarchistic fashion. Maybe there's something to that. And where we go from there, I don't quite know. Maybe the religious types will become more moderate and then the anarchists will become less chaotic. Who knows?
That would be like an interesting sight when it happens. Yeah, no, it was just like, that was just because I always rant about it because I'm so, it's important that like, because it's obviously like I've heard it on Deutsche Welle, and it's now on getting a lot more news and coverage about autocracy. Like I kind of saw it coming, like even before January 6th, which is, you know, the Capitol insurrection, which it's just bad as fuck. But I've seen it even years before, like I mentioned, and also like it's getting to the point where it is frightening to the sense, because it stirs a lot of like how I was brought up as, and it's just, I don't want people that disguise themselves as quote liberals or lefties to say, you know what, at least we're not them, so don't go over there. But if they want actual change, wouldn't people like myself go back to the Republican Party, or more people to be welcome? That way there can be change within that system, and then make it to the point where it's healthy and two parties can actually balance it out. Because like I don't know, I believe in just going into a system to make a change, not just going to one side and say, don't go over there. So yeah, it's just off by
Right. Yeah. I have to go in a minute or two, but that is also a strain I have seen. So just like I was saying, you see more and more people starting to think the Republican Party is illegitimate. I've also seen more and more conservative types saying basically you can't reform the system, that there has to be like a full scale uprooting of it, which, you know, is not a very conservative sentiment,
It's
but
not.
basically they're what they're saying is that like you can't affect change through politics anymore because the bureaucracies are now very democratic and very anti-Republican. And so even if the Republicans get elected into office, they're not going to be able to actually make any changes because the bureaucracies that work for them will simply resist them. And that this is what happened under Trump. And they'll point to certain various bureaucracies where people tried to like pass laws, but everybody thwarted them. Because, you know, here's the thing about bureaucracies. The bureaucrats who work for bureaucracies know how bureaucracies work better than the people who get appointed to run those bureaucracies. If I spent 30 years of my life working for the Treasury, and then you're a political appointee who's never worked for the Treasury, but you have a PhD in economics from Stanford or something, and now you're running the Treasury, I'm going to know a hell of a lot more about how to make things happen in the Treasury Department than you will, because I know the people, I know how this place works, I know the culture, I know the levers, and you, the appointee, are completely dependent on people like me for your sense of how this place works. So we can mislead you, we can give you the sense that this will be a popular thing, and then it'll cause, you know, employee revolt. And so I'm seeing various figures on the right, more and more people. Probably the most prominent is a guy named Sohrab Ahmari, who edits a journal called First Things, who are basically saying, yeah, we need to like page one rewrite of America, right? We need to like fire all the bureaucrats and replace them with who knows who, because like you can't fire all those people. First of all, you can't fire them. Second of all, where do you get replacements from? So I'm not entirely sure how this is supposed to work, but there's definitely, I'm hearing from both sides more and more people saying the other side is just a side we can't deal with. And maybe then what would happen is just America breaks apart and goes its separate ways, like a national divorce, like some people are saying. I suppose that would be better than the alternative, if the alternative is like a civil war or something like that. But I don't know that a national divorce is realistic either, because everybody's going to want to know who gets the nukes. So, yeah.
But
so
as a professor, sorry to cut you short, because you know you have to go and I have to go too. Are we in an interesting time?
Yes, in the sense of that term that you hear from the Chinese fortune, may you live in interesting times. This was a curse. This was not like a hope for the future. Interesting times are when all sorts of very surprising and unusual and unprecedented things happen, causing a lot of disruption and a lot of change. I'm pretty confident that we are in an interesting time, not just because of the politics, but also because of the technological changes. Like social media and surveillance capitalism are just a couple of the things, but then there's also like what's going to happen with AI, right? Like, are they going to start to get really smart to the point where we're not sure we can control them anymore? What's going to happen with like environmental change, right? Is it as bad as some of the most apocalyptic people are saying? I don't think so. But is it going to cause some dislocations? I think so. And what's going to happen when you have lots more people who are what they call climate refugees, right? Who are like leaving their country because
it's just so bad to live there.
Yeah, because they aren't able to adapt to the environmental changes. Well, you've seen what happens in Europe when you have huge influx of migrants to Europe. You start to see this big rise of very right-wing parties. You had an openly Nazi party in Greece called Golden Dawn that even had a swastika as part of their symbol.
That's
and
stupid.
So like this is and they got like 16% of the vote.
They did. That's scary.
Yeah, so there's instability I see in the future. That said, one of the things that people are very bad at predicting is the future.
Yeah.
And all sorts of things are probably going to happen that none of us expect or anticipate that are going to cause positive changes as well. It's not only going to be negative. And there's going to be all sorts of things that are good that maybe we're not seeing right now that are going to allow us to like respond to these things better than we might otherwise think. That's my hopeful note at the end.
All right, thank you so very much. Hopefully, you have more time and we can have another shot at this because it's so juicy. So juicy. And it's also great to have like a professor as well, because I just want more people, and then obviously more of my listeners to get like someone that has studied it, not just from a student perspective, but someone that has studied it. But thank you so very much.
My pleasure.
Do you have like a final message for anyone out there?
Just what I said before, that that even if things look bad, history doesn't move just in a straight line. There are all sorts of what Nicholas Nassim Taleb calls black swan events, all sorts of things you couldn't predict, like this pandemic, for instance, that cause huge changes to how you thought things were going to go. So we are living in interesting times, but maybe in good ways too. So that's my last word.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.